I'm totally delighted to have a very good friend of mine, Rachel Stock, on the podcast today. Welcome, Rachel.
I'm so excited to be here, Lisa. I can't wait to get started, and just thanks for the invitation.
So Rachel, the reason we wanted to have her on the podcast is she's got a very inspiring story. Her passion for neurodiversity started when her son Harry was diagnosed at 4 years old. We thought it'd be really useful to share some of that journey and the work that she does in supporting parents of neurodiverse children and helping them navigate some of the challenges that she faced when she was faced with the same thing many years ago. So thank you again, Rachel.
What a lovely introduction. And it's so nice to be talking about this with such a good friend. And equally, I've been inspired by you as well, Lisa, over the years. So I think there's a mutual respect and admiration there. I'm on my journey with the help of the Power Up programme.
Well, that's very kind.
And yeah, it's been an interesting path, one that sort of, as you said, started with my son Harry when he was diagnosed at 4. I kind of always knew that there was some differences there, but as a new parent, you're not always sure of whether those differences are real or whether they are, you worrying or, over anxiety. And also, we don't start parenting with a manual. We don't really know what we're doing when we become a parent.
Was this your first child? So
it was,
you not only have the first child situation, no manual, no experience, no reference points. You're also starting to experience something that you felt without having any knowledge of parenting, that there was something different. So what was that? How did you figure what was kind of going on that was
it was just the behaviour and sort of the sort of energy and the inability to engage him into the normal sort of typical things that children would do. He was obsessed with music and still is now today.
I remember when he was young, and he used to be able to, from really young, like tiny, used to be able to say exactly where a track was on an album, and
it's how he taught himself how to read, from reading the back of CDs. And when we used to go to children's parties, he'd make beeline for the stereo system where they'd be playing all the party music, and he'd want to be the DJ. And of course the parents wouldn't necessarily understand that it was driven by this obsession by music. They just thought he was being kind of difficult. And of course I was unaware of how to sort of, steer him, because he was so persistent. You tried to sort of steer him away and he'd go right back. Even to I've got to tell you this story, because when he started nursery, he even found a CD in the back of a book in the nursery library that they didn't even know was there.
So you know what I mean? Out as well.
So he hunted it out. Wherever there was music to be heard, he would find it.
Wow.
So yeah, it's those kind of challenges, which are great, but also come with challenges.
And so from your journey and your experience in those early days, what were some of the challenges that inspired you to do the work you do today in coaching parents of neurodiverse children?
Well, when he was diagnosed, we were referred to the National Autistic Society, who have been a great support. But in addition to that, there wasn't an awful lot of support out there. So, for example, the paediatrician said to me the day of the diagnosis, you'll have to go research this yourself because there's no support available.
Wow.
So that's what I did. That's what I decided to do. And I think within the first year, I'd read 50 books started off with autism and Asperger's syndrome, and then went on to different neurodiverse conditions, and just found my special interest, if you like. I just loved reading about it. And so that inspired me to continue learning, but also driven by the fact that there was that lack of support out there, and understand, the position that I was in, not really knowing where to turn. And I felt there must be other parents out there that need that support of somebody who's lived the experience.
And you certainly, you pursued a whole, you got a whole host of qualifications, didn't you? Because you really wanted to not only draw on your experience, but also be backed up with the research and the methods and all of that sort of thing. I mean, I don't think anybody has got a list of qualifications quite like yours.
Every time I saw you, I was like, oh yeah, I've got another diploma, Yeah. So like that, yeah. I mean, I was just working my way through all the books, doing research, and then I thought, well, if I want to do this as a job, I've got to back it up with some qualifications. So I took multiple qualifications, studied through COVID as well, and just continued to study until I felt I had enough to warrant being a professional coach.
Well, that's that, and that brings us nicely to why we're really here today. And one, to learn a little bit about your story for the listeners. Anyone listening, but certainly with neurodiverse children, I love this. I mean, anyone who is a parent is going to enjoy this, having spoken to you previously about it. And what can you do to help those people who are perhaps discovering this themselves, challenged with it, not quite knowing where to go because necessarily there isn't the level of support there you might expect. So I think that would be interesting for people to learn about. And also, how do they look after themselves as well? How do the parents look? I know you've talked about that before. We were setting up this podcast. You talked about the importance of self-care for parents. And then finally, and particularly something that would definitely interest us as a developmental professional training business, we're becoming much more aware of how does neurodiversity play itself out in the workplace professionally. Yeah. And what are we doing to cater for those people in all environments so we can embrace the talents of those people equally. Yeah, so that would be interesting to hear a bit more about that.
And I think what you've highlighted there is the strengths of neurodiversity must be at the forefront, because neurodiverse people have a lot to offer. They have many strengths. And if we focus on those, it's about celebrating strengths, supporting the challenges. And I think with that mindset, you can progress and thrive.
Would it be quite useful? I think it might be quite useful the word neurodiversity, Asperger's, autism, being, people use the phrase on the spectrum. I know when I first spoke to you about this, you gave some clarity to me, and I found it very useful because it's just words you hear and you're not quite sure if you're using them in the right place, what's the right language to use. It might be really useful just to give a sort of, when people use that sort of language, what are they really describing when we talk about neurodiversity? And what is this thing people call being on the spectrum?
It can be very muddled because it's language, isn't it? And people use language in multiple different ways. But neurodiversity is the umbrella term for neurodevelopmental conditions, such as autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, Tourette's syndrome, neurological differences. So, as I said, neurodiversity is the umbrella term. So it kind of describes all of those conditions. They're all neurodiverse conditions. Yeah. ASD is the diagnostic term for autism, which is autistic spectrum disorder. Okay. I don't like that term, disorder. I tend to use difference. And that's why I came up with the strapline of amazing, special, different, because
which is brilliant. We love that. I mean, amazing, special, different. That is brilliant.
And every child is amazing, special, different, whether they've got a diagnosis or not, right? And that's the point. And I think we tend to sort of put labels out there, and actually it comes with such negativity, and we need to start thinking about the positives and creating a world to support those people in the environment so that they can then focus on their strengths and not worry about their challenges so much.
Absolutely. And I read something yesterday, and it described neurodiversity as natural variations in the brain.
Yes, absolutely.
So I love that. The word disorder is just so loaded, isn't it? And,
it is.
And, like you say, really does add to some of the sort of negativity around this.
Absolutely. And it's like that whole disability or differently abled, isn't it? It's like it's just turning language around to make it more positive. And I heard somebody say the other day, which was on a podcast actually, it was all about neurodiversity, and the guy said, I'm not neurodiverse, the human race is neurodiverse. And I think that is key to where we're heading, hopefully.
Fantastic. And so when you, obviously you've told us a little bit about your journey. Did you sort of narrow down on the fact you wanted to coach parents fairly quickly, or was that ever a different path initially?
No, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do one-to-one coaching. The thought of doing group sessions or public speaking has always terrified me. So one-to-one coaching was my focus initially, and I think I gathered all the research, all the content from my program and the website. My cousin, amazing Louise Peacock, she designed my website for me, and I did the Power Up program at the same time, and it all just kind of came together. And I launched and started coaching parents on a one-to-one basis. But that belief that I think I really worked on through the Power Up program, that belief that I wasn't secure enough in what I had to say, was something I had to work on to be able to then up my game, up my skill set, and be able to talk to more people about it and believe in what I was saying.
Which is what you're doing now, which I've heard a lot about, which is amazing.
So you have a role with in addition to the work that you're doing in your business, you've got a role with the National Autistic Society, haven't you?
Yeah, so I was, as I was doing my one-to-one coaching, I was trying to build up the sort of client base and reach as many parents as I could. But that's really hard. Like, marketing yourself is really, I found it really difficult. And I thought, I know there are so many people out there that need my help. How do I get to them?
Yeah.
So I thought, right, okay, maybe I could do my one-to-one coaching with parents and then look for a job in that area where I could support families via another source. So I applied for some jobs and landed a job with the National Autistic Society, which is amazing. I love it. I reach so many parents that way, and I can use my knowledge with the guidance of the National Autistic Society structure, delivering workshops to parents with either newly diagnosed children or who are on the pathway to diagnosis.
Yeah.
So that's amazing. I've managed to reach more parents.
I mean, that's just fantastic, and it's responding directly to the sort of failing that you experienced right back when Harry was 4.
Absolutely.
So what are some of the typical challenges that parents will face with neurodiverse children? What do they typically face? You face them yourself.
Yeah, so
not everybody's going to go and read 50 books, are they?
No.
And it's not going to be necessarily their chosen field. So what, first of all, are some of the challenges that they might face?
So I'll use my 2 children as examples, but they're obviously, every neurodiverse child is different. They display differently, but there are main areas of how these conditions impact individual children, and that might be communication, social communication, and interaction challenges. So may find it difficult to navigate the social world. Okay, so they don't necessarily have the social manual, and these skills need to be taught. It doesn't mean they can't learn them; they just need to be taught. And so it's having a structure in place to be able to guide your children through the social world. Communication, so visual supports, things like that, to help them communicate and support their communication, because with a struggle with communication, comes a lot of frustration. But with my kids, Harry, it was more to do with sensory. So his sensory processing was kind of, you call it spiky, which meant that he was under sensitive in some areas, oversensitive in others. So, for example, he would find it very challenging to have a shower, scream all the time, have his hair cut. He found sensitivities in clothes, so couldn't stand labels and things like that. So there was lots of frustration, lots of meltdowns, lots of challenging behaviours until I understood what was going on. And it's all about sensory regulation, helping them to regulate their sensory processing.
And is every child completely different in that respect? So it's sort of decoding the combinations of
absolutely
for your own child. So how do you go about supporting parents in doing that? Is it noticing?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. So there are tools available where you can sort of assess your child's sensory profile. which we can help with, National Autistic Society can help with, I can help with. OTs particularly great at helping parents, supporting parents. There are long waiting lists again, but there's some things that you can do at home, which I used to do with Harry before he went to school, just sort of basic exercises to get the sort of muscle, nerve, brain function going, to aid focus and communication, and to keep them sort of regulated so they're not sort of, you know, all over the place in school, you know, fidgeting, you know, having to leave the classroom, that kind of thing, or feeling of anxiety, which can sort of impact their focus and concentration in class.
You mentioned earlier about, you know, the need for parents to put their own gas mask on first, you know, and take care of themselves. I mean, the natural instinct of a parent is to put your child first. So what are some of the advice that you give to parents in
well,
this?
I think this is a really important point, because neurodiverse children, particularly when they're young, are exhausting to parents. So I think
any child is, full stop.
Exactly.
Let alone adding this other layer on.
Exactly.
Yeah. Patience you have to have.
So I think it's on the ADHD UK website, they say that a neurotypical parent needs to consciously parent around sort of 65, 70% of the time, whereas a neurodiverse parent needs to consciously parent 95% of the time. So that explains the amount of effort it takes to parent a neurodiverse child. Not that you don't, you know, obviously that's going to happen, and you'll do it with love and intent and affection and purpose, but I think that warrants this being probably the most important point, that you need to make sure that you're looking after yourself. You need to make sure that you're resting in all the right areas, mentally, physically, but also getting good physical exercise, eating good nutrition, you know, all of those, looking after your gut health, all of those areas that I think are, you know, really important when it comes to, you know, self-care.
And a lot of those sorts of strategies form the support that parents can give their children.
Exactly right. So it's like a domino effect, you know, you look after yourself and you nourish yourself mentally, physically, and then that sort of passes on to your children. But then in addition to that, there are other areas of support that are required, and that's different for every neurodiverse children.
Yeah. And I know a lot of your work is obviously, you know, focused on the parents, but how do you know, help neurodiverse children, I don't want to say come to terms with, but embrace their own diversity and their own. I mean, I always love to think of these as superpowers, you know, because Harry and Jess definitely have superpowers. They are massive balls of energy that just they just fill up a room, don't they? You know, with energy when they enter.
Another question to supplement that as you answer that question, because what triggers in my mind is, to what degree do they recognise the different?
Yeah.
So, well, this is interesting.
Do they have a cognition to recognise that they're different?
So, and I think that depends on their ability to, you know, their self-awareness and their ability to learn. So neurodiversity can have a wide sort of diverse impact. So it's not necessarily, and we've moved away from that high functioning, low functioning. We don't use that language anymore because it can be inappropriate. But it is, if a child is aware enough, self-aware enough, that they are aware that they are behaving differently or thinking differently to their peers, maybe.
Yeah.
Then they will feel different. And it's when they start to feel different that conversation needs to start happening, you know, to open up that we're all different, we all have different brains. This is sort of how I started it with Harry. You know, one person will be really good at maths, another person will be really good at playing the guitar. You know, we're all different, we have strengths in different areas, and we all have challenges in different areas. And it's how we deal with those challenges and how those challenges are supported, which will help with that self-esteem and confidence to believe in yourself.
And you mentioned in a conversation that we had previously about masking, particularly in autism in girls. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's relevant to this part of the conversation.
I think it's an area of, you know, as well as with adults who are discovering that they're neurodiverse in later life, because for girls it's been overlooked because of their amazing ability to mask and to almost blend in to their friendship groups. So they'll almost be just on the outskirts of friendship groups, kind of mimicking friends, being very agreeable. So there's this sort of fight, flight, freeze, fawning. Fawning is people pleasing. So that's where that comes into the sort of anxiety part of it. And so when they sort of breeze through infant school, primary school, and when they get to secondary school, that's when the mask starts to come off, because it becomes more apparent then that they're not necessarily able to navigate the social world in the same way as others are. And there's a bit more, you know, of the whole kind of banter and bullying and that kind of stuff that happens in secondary schools, isn't there? So I think it's just causes that trigger of anxiety and that becoming apparent that there's something different going on.
And is that what can sometimes lead to emotional-based school avoidance then, if people aren't getting the support?
Neurodiversity. There's a huge number of neurodiverse students involved in emotional-based school avoidance, and this is a huge topic in England at the moment. You know, lots of schools, particularly in Surrey. I mean, I know that it's a big thing in Surrey. There's lots of training going on with schools and teachers, and I was involved in some training recently, which is all about getting that collaboration between parents and teachers, so that they're working together to put the child in the centre and become curious about why this emotional-based school avoidance is happening. But yeah, it's driven by anxiety because their neurodiversities aren't being supported.
Yeah.
Good. For people listening to this and thinking, wow, you know, this sounds like someone I know, right? I mean, even you know, I've got grown-up kids, so to speak, but one of them in particular, we had an open conversation about whether or not, you know, and he's talking about getting assessed. So this can go on for some time.
Absolutely.
And not actually, he's in his 20s, but he's trying to figure out why he thinks differently, why he works differently. And so I think he is going to go down the route of being assessed. But the very presence of that and not understanding it is the source of a lot of anxiety, I know for him, that plays itself out in not wanting to get into social situations, avoiding crowded places, not wanting to put himself in a position he doesn't feel he might be able to cope with, etc.
And it's too much information. That's what's happening. So there's so much going on around him that his brain is struggling to process all of that information that's coming in via his sight, his hearing. It's all too much for his brain to handle in that moment. And so it's about that sort of regular breaks or using tools in the moment. So there's some wonderfully fun things that you can buy. There's little sort of equipment that you can use to assist in those situations, or drowning out all that periphery noise.
I remember walking down the street, we were going to go in this restaurant or this bar, and he looked in and he went, no. It's like it's too much, too much going on, too noisy, too many stimulus everywhere.
I mean, things like that. There's, it sounds neurodiverse. There's too much going on, sensory differences, and it's working out his sensory profile and then using the right support. And it's okay if it's too much, you don't have to go into play, or you can go in and come out, or you can restrict the time, or you can request in advance a table in the corner, you can go at a not so busy time. So there's all these little strategies that you can use once you know and you understand what your challenges are. You can then adapt your life to cater for those things.
I think that's the key as well. Someone close to our family has just recently been diagnosed, and they're sort of in their late teens, early 20s, so fairly late, but has always felt a little bit different and experienced some of the things that Martin's talking about. And what he has said is that actually having an answer to why
That's the point.
Has been massively freeing.
Yes.
And it's actually been a massively positive experience. And like you say, we're all on a spectrum somewhere. Just finding out why some of those things feel that way. And then you can find the coping strategies, like you say.
Absolutely. And it does reduce that anxiety. As go back to when I told my son, told Harry, that it did give him some relief and some answers as to why he felt different. He used to say to me things like, "Mum, I want a different brain." And I knew at that point that was the right time to approach it, because he didn't want a different brain. He just needed to understand why his brain worked differently. And now he's gone on to indulged him in his special interest. He plays piano, he has drum lessons, he sings, he's now creating his own album. So if you can nurture these kind of interests and help them develop and nourish them, they can really thrive and excel.
Absolutely. So if somebody is, having these sorts of feelings and these questions in their head, what should they do? Where do they go to find out more? Obviously, they come to you.
Well, I mean, obviously I can provide, support for them, and I do discovery calls. We can just have an initial chat and just work out whether it is something that I can support them with, and then I can signpost them different areas, different places. I find that actually sometimes that's what parents want, is just to be signposted. Other parents want that program to help them understand all the areas that are impacted and share with them with the resources and support strategies. But in addition to that, there are long waiting lists for diagnosis at the moment. So if you're prepared to wait for the 2.5 years, I think it is at the moment, for autism and ADHD on the National Health, then that doesn't mean you can't get support now. You don't need the diagnosis to get support. I think that's a really important point. I think some parents think, well, I've got to wait all this time, then the support has to come later, and it's not. The support can happen now, and then you go for the whilst you're waiting for the diagnosis. If you're lucky enough and fortunate enough to have private medical insurance, a lot of the private medical insurance companies now are covering neurodiverse assessments, which is great. It means you can get it quicker if you can afford, and then if you don't have private medical insurance, you can go down the private route, but that's going to cost.
Before we leave this section on and move to talking about the organisation, so it'll be a nice sort of final thing to finish on. Having been being a parent, neurodiverse children, obviously, you're working with a number of parents. Is there sort of, you have mentioned some things already, but if there were sort of 3 or 4 key things that, I know they could be very generic, and you've stated very clearly it all depends on the condition that is showing and the situation of each child. But from the parent's point of view, what would be sort of 3 or 4 things that you think, generically could apply, that they could do?
I think accepting that there's always that level of anxiety with your children. So it doesn't take much to tip them over the edge, and it's all about helping to reduce that anxiety. So
not trying to eliminate it. That's the point. Yes.
If your child is prone to anxiety and they are sensory sensitive, there's a lot of information coming in at once, and their brain struggles to process. They may have a slower processing time. There's all these things that can impact our children. Then we need to come from an empathetic and understanding approach as much as possible. We have busy lives. We get, stressed, and that's why self-care is so important, because we need to keep that level of calm in order to be able to encourage our kids and not put additional anxiety on top of them.
Makes sense,
the normal parenting strategies don't work or the typical parenting strategies don't work for neurodiverse kids. It's got to be more empathy, more calm, and more understanding, and that sort of guidance and support approach rather than parenting.
Because as parents, we're trying to teach our children right from wrong. This is good. This is not so good. This is better. This is not so good. Etc. How does that? We kind of know the approach of reinforcing the positive. But this has got to be this on steroids, I assume.
Yes, we're able to do that, right? But we never do it in the moment. So when the tension is high and the anxiety is high and the stress is high, we try and teach them in that moment. It's just going to explode even further. It's like a volcano erupting, and it's going to continue to erupt until the surface underneath stops bubbling, so we've got to allow that to happen first before we can then reflect on what's happened and guide them through. And sometimes our children will need a sort of conversation or a social story, something visually to help them understand why that happened and what next time would be a good approach to take in that situation, and sort of taking away that blame, shame kind of part of parenting, which has always been around, is kind of changing the narrative when it comes to working with neurodiverse children, particularly because that anxiety is always high.
And I guess these are all tools that the child themselves can learn and have in their toolkit as they progress throughout life. I'm interested, and it's probably a nice transition into the workplace conversation. Are there specific things that parents can do to help neurodiverse children, find their own purpose and navigate the whole sort of career path and the opportunities that lay in front of them?
Yeah, I mean, there are some services out there which are brilliant, some sort of charity or local council funded services which we can signpost to, but apprenticeships are the way forward when it comes to neurodiversity, because there is a structure and it's practical. You're learning as you're doing, and for neurodiverse they tend to learn in a multi-sensory way.
Yeah.
So they'll need to be moving whilst, all about this, right? There's sort of different ways that we all learn.
Multiple intelligences,
Multiple intelligences, So they need to be doing while they're learning. And this brings, just mentioning Jess as well, being dyslexic, she needs that to learn, my daughter. So she will need to learn while she's, she loves DT, she loves art, she loves all the creative things, and that is dyslexic learning.
And as an individual goes into adulthood and they're in the workplace, how should they sort of advocate for their needs in a new environment like that?
So I think neurodiversity in the workplace is actually, I think, been around a lot longer than the word neurodiversity in home life.
Yes.
And I think that's something that stuck out to me when I was learning about this stuff. It's like, I've heard about neurodiversity in the workplace, but I've not really considered it in my home life.
Yeah.
So I think it's out there, and there are definitely adjustments that companies make for neurodiverse employees. I think what needs to happen is that employees need to be braver about communicating their needs with their employers, because the help is there, the adjustments are there. They can make these alterations for their employees, but the employees need to communicate that with their employers.
And you do work, don't you, with organisations? You do workshops with organisations to help with that, because I think part of it as well is educating the rest of the workforce as well. And
absolutely,
conversations are happening more, but I think there's more that can be done.
So it was the Power Up programme that powered me up to do this and be able to deliver workshops to, I think I delivered one to internationally for 75 employees. I mean, I would never have done that a couple of years ago. There's no way. They would never have done that.
I remember you talking about it. We're talking about the fear of it. And
the fear was just immense, that kind of imposter syndrome and all that business.
Yeah. But I did into those opportunities, and that's, coming back to where we started. That's what's inspiring.
Yeah. And it really did help. And I think what came out of that webinar was that, the employers were really keen to find out what adjustments they could make and how they could support their neurodiverse employees. And I think it was the employees really that were like becoming more aware of what their needs are and then communicating that with their employees. And I think there's that breakdown of communication that maybe needs to be improved.
Because in the same way you're talking about the parent-child here, manager, employee, manager, direct report. It's the same kind of thing, isn't it? You've got to recognise, I guess it's a two-way thing as an adult. One, for me to communicate how I'm feeling or my so-called condition, I'm sure that's the right word to use, but my neurodiverse needs. So one or two people have come and said to me about the materials that we have, for example. And, if the materials are, could you make them a little bit more simpler, more colourful, easy to read,
that's right.
Not so heavy, but our materials particularly are that anyway. But and one person actually asked me, well, was it designed specifically? Did you take that into consideration? So this is interesting for me, that is creeping into one of our suppliers came to this massive, big, I'm sure it was some sort of European legislation around the requirements to make sure that you're actually catering for all types of learning. So I think we're going to go see more and more of this, and great.
Yeah, and I think it is the sort of visual stuff that needs that. Yeah, you're right. That sort of different coloured backgrounds, bigger text, different fonts. More to the point, less wordy. It's all that's going to help neurodiverse, because again, it's about the processing, isn't it? Processing too much information.
Again, I'm not sure what element of neurodiversity it is, but the literal translation of things as well. Notice that. It's very literal.
In terms of how things are worded.
Yeah, well, you told me to do this and I'm doing it.
Yeah.
Rather than they're not comfortable in the ambiguity.
Yes.
Of the situation, the instruction.
So there's a good example of this. So the teacher asks the child, "Can you open the window?" And the child says yes and doesn't open the window.
Yeah.
Is the child being naughty? Well, no, the child isn't being naughty, because you didn't ask him to open the window. You said, "Can you open the window?"
Yeah.
Well, yes, I can. If you ask me to do it, I can.
Love that.
I remember my son telling me when he went on his early interviews, he was asked the question, what would you do in a situation where another employee is, dealing with some point of difference or a confrontation? How would you handle that? And his answer was, I can't answer that question, so I've never been in that situation.
Not being able to, yeah.
And he just gave a literal answer to the question. That's not something I'm familiar with. I can't possibly answer that because I've never actually experienced it.
Yes.
So how can I give you an answer on it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's they need that concrete, that sort of to be able to understand it. I think that's the key there.
I guess in our audiences, a lot of the time we don't really know the different needs in the room, so it's about trying to cater to as wider diversity as possible, in terms of not only how we're delivering, but the resources and everything that support it.
Absolutely. And there's some autistic young people that do some sort of videos for the National Autistic Society, and they communicate their experience, their lived experience. And it's really interesting. What they say is that they just wish that people would put things in more step-by-step instructions with less information, make it more direct and more simplified, because then they will be able to process it much easier. And it just needs kindness and patience. Then they're enabled to do what they need to do.
Yeah, I'm really surprised what you said about, organisations being further forward, because it feels like the conversation is happening more at a personal level. Some of the larger organisations need to catch up. But when you told me about the work that you were doing and how organisations, diversity has always been a word that's been used, but neurodiversity, I think, is slightly different, but it's fantastic to hear.
I think that the conversation has been happening for a while, neurodiversity in the workplace, different ways that people function, because I remember hearing about it years ago. Maybe I was just in a forward thinking company, I have no idea, but anyway, the conversation was there. But I think because there are so many more people coming to terms and recognising it in themselves, is the communication between employees and companies having that conversation about what their needs are. Because there are so many different needs. One person might not be able to contribute in a meeting because they can't ever quite find the right moment to say their piece. And so they may need to go away, write down notes, and then come back to their boss and communicate it with them. And then they may feel, actually, in a meeting, I struggle with anxiety so much because I'm always conscious about the fact I'm not contributing. Is it worth me being in that meeting? Is it better for me, or is it okay if everybody's aware that I'm here, I'm taking everything in, but I'm not going to be contributing because that's not my style? And once everybody understands that isn't that person's style, then there won't be any anxiety.
Yeah,
right.
It's
Excellent.
that conversation that needs to happen, so that everybody, that diversity is accepted and acknowledged.
Now, these are great tips for leaders and managers, and indeed for people like me as a facilitator. I spend all my time in front of audiences. And I mean, I know quite a bit about different learning styles and behavioural styles. And I know that I was taught very, very early on in my facilitation career the concept that there are no such thing as inflexible, no such thing as resistant learners, only inflexible teachers. And I always think it's our responsibility to find a way that is suitable for the learner, rather than make the learner at fault. You should be contributing more. Or you're very quiet. What's your point of view? That's the worst thing you can say to someone.
Put somebody on the spot like that,
because they're quiet because they want to be quiet. Quiet does not equal I'm not interested. Quiet equals I am quiet for a reason. And you have to bring those people into the conversation, maybe in smaller groups, and get someone else to speak on their behalf. And it's not to say we shouldn't be bringing people out of their shell. It's not to say we shouldn't be encouraging people come out of their comfort zone. But if you just treat everybody with the same method, you've only got one tool in your box. You're very limited as a leader or a teacher.
Well, it goes back to what Rachel was saying earlier, doesn't it? You can do these things. You have to do it with empathy. You have to do it from, an
understanding. Absolutely, and this relates back as well to children. In a meltdown, in that moment where they're displaying that type of behaviour, or even shut down, where they're displaying nothing. It's distressed behaviour. It's not it's not a child being naughty. They're distressed. They're trying to communicate something with you. There's an unmet need, or they're overwhelmed. Right. And that's what needs to be understood as well.
Yeah, and it's about changing conditioning for some people, isn't it? The conditioning that this is right, that is wrong.
Yeah.
And I think there's some fantastic tips in there for people like us that are coaches and trainers and leaders and business owners as well. Before we finish, I think it'd be really interesting to understand what the future looks like for your business. What are your plans?
Wow. There's no limits now.
Yeah.
Since Power Up, that's it. I'm on course, and I'm going to continue to work with the National Autistic Society. I love that element. I can reach loads of parents that way, and I'm supporting an amazing charity. So I'm going to stick with them part-time, and then outside of that, continue with my coaching, one-to-one one-to-one coaching sessions with parents, and develop my corporate work as well. So hopefully more webinars, and just develop in all the areas I'm currently working in. I mean, I'd love to at some point maybe help with the backlog of the diagnostic area, but I mean that will take more studying, and at the moment I'm quite happy doing what I'm doing, but that is an area that I may look at in the future.
I know it won't be long before you want to do a bit more studying.
You know how I love a bit of studying.
In a nutshell, you are.
What kind of, and taking the bigger picture, you've been in this world for a while now, and you're better informed than most. What are your hopes at a societal level, an educational level, for this particular subject?
So societal, I think, wider understanding of neurodiversity, and looking at the fact that behaviour that is challenging is distress rather than that judgmental view. I mean, just that for me is something that needs to change. When it comes to the education system, there's some breakdowns going on from council funding to schools, and so there needs to be a better structure in place where schools can have the right investment in providing this support to the neurodiverse community in schools. Now, that means more people going into schools to help with anxiety, mental health, which I think there is a bit of conversation going on about that, government, which is great. We'd like to see more of that. But I think also teachers and teaching staff recognising that kids aren't displaying behaviours that are negative, as you know, this applies to that environment as well. They're not displaying these negative behaviours because they want to. They don't want to. They're just not being supported in the right way, and they need to be given that understanding, that empathy, and provided with the support they need, whether it be to come out of the class and have a walking around break, or do something practical, or do a job for a teacher, or being given something else to do that takes their focus away from sitting in a classroom. Can you imagine what it's like to sit in a classroom when you've got 100 different ideas going through your brain?
Yeah.
And that's ADHD in a nutshell.
Yeah.
How can you be expected to sit there and listen and focus? And they're not built for that.
No.
So we need
one-size-fits-all approach, isn't it?
Yeah, and that, you know, dyslexic children, neurodiversity is about a third of the population. So currently in schools, there are a third of students that are struggling in schools one way or another. Some are being well supported, some aren't. And I think, you know, there needs to be more awareness and more support in those areas.
I think you need to be an ASD government coach.
Okay.
Yeah. Talking about that, Rachel, I'm sure I remember seeing or hearing or something. It was a program I was watching, and I'm sure it was a fairly senior MP had a neurodiverse child, and he himself was talking about how difficult it was to get the school to understand, how difficult it was to get the support. And so, I think that is the sort of thing you need, is someone in the government who has got a real deep understanding of it and recognises that we need to change attitudes and mindsets and to normalise it, to normalise, make the education system embrace these people rather than parking them in a different building, integrating with a load of other children with exactly the same thing. That's not the thing to do.
Exactly right.
Right. No, not at all.
Okay,
no.
I'll put that on my to-do list, Martin.
Yeah, I'm just on the phone to Richard now.
Excellent. Well, look, fantastic. I mean,
fantastic conversation.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
As you said, parenting full stop at the top of this podcast is difficult enough as it is.
Yeah.
Without the playbook, our only experience is our own, and sometimes our own experience is our own parents, which we insist we're never going to be like, and we end up becoming just like them.
Exactly right.
And so we have to learn as we go. And so I think what you do is absolutely invaluable. And if people get in touch with you, we can.
We'll have links and stuff, but how is
website is www.asdparentcoach.co.uk. There's a contact page on my website, so they can contact me that way. I also have a Facebook page, Instagram page as well.
Fantastic.
Or they can email me on help@asdparentcoach.co.uk.
There you go. Very reachable.
It's been so inspiring being your friend for
the feelings mutual.
And I'm just so excited to just feel such an exciting time, and you're making such an impact, and hats off to you. It's a big job, and it takes the courage of someone like you to take it on. So
bless you. Thank you. I love what I do, and I'm grateful that you guys inspired me to keep going. So thanks.
You've done brilliantly, Rachel, and it's been amazing to watch the journey over a very short period of time and see you come out of your shell, believe in your purpose, have the courage to go beyond your fears to actually deliver the message to the people that need it. And that's the important thing, because we've got to get past our own inhibitions to be able to reach the people that need your help and need your message. So long may it continue. And we're always here, as always, to support you.
Thanks so much, both of you. I've really enjoyed today. Thank you.